It was Friday afternoon and you could already feel it, that specific anticipation that built up through the whole week. School was done. Work was done. And sometime before dinner, somebody in the house was going to say it. You want to go to Blockbuster tonight? And just like that, the whole evening had a shape to it. You'd get in the car. Maybe it was already getting dark. Maybe it was still that golden late afternoon light depending on the time of year. And as you pulled into that parking lot that was always fuller than you expected, you'd see the sign. Blue and yellow. Big block letters. Lit up against whatever the sky was doing that night. And something in you just settled. Like the weekend had officially started. The doors slid open and the smell hit you first. It's hard to describe that smell to someone who never experienced it, but if you were there, you know exactly what it was. It was the plastic of 1,000 VHS cases, slightly warm from the store lighting. It was the faint chemical smell of the cases themselves, that slick hard plastic with the paper sleeve inside. It was carpet, that specific commercial carpet smell of a retail store that got a lot of foot traffic. And underneath all of it, if you were lucky, there was popcorn, because a lot of locations had a little popcorn machine near the front, and on a busy night you could smell it from the parking lot. You walked in and the new releases were right there. That wall. That famous wall of new releases along the right side or sometimes wrapping around the front, depending on the layout of your particular store. Each movie had its own slot, its own little cardboard display box with the cover art facing out, and behind it, sometimes one copy, sometimes 3 or 4, sometimes none at all because it was Friday and everyone had the same idea you did. That was the first decision point. The new release wall. You'd scan it slowly. Reading titles. Looking at cover art. Picking up a box, turning it over, reading the back. The back of a VHS box was its own little art form, a few sentences trying to sell you on the next 2 hours of your life, usually with 1 or 2 pull quotes from critics, usually with a cast list at the bottom. You'd read it, you'd think about it, you'd put it back. Pick up another one. Read the back of that one too. And then there was the question of availability. Because with new releases, you had to check. The movie might be right there on the display, you might be holding the box in your hand, but the actual tape might be gone. The empty box just meant someone had thought to rent it before you. You'd have to take the empty box to the counter, or sometimes there was a little system where you'd pull a ticket from below the box, and the clerk would go check in the back. The back. That mysterious back room that only employees could enter. You'd stand at the counter and watch them disappear through a door and come out 30 seconds later either holding the tape in its plastic case, that satisfying black rectangular case with the white label, or coming back with nothing, shaking their head, telling you it was all checked out, but they could put you on a waiting list if you wanted. The waiting list. You'd give them your name and phone number and they'd call you when it came in. And sometimes they actually called. And sometimes you forgot you were on it and the call came 3 weeks later when you'd already seen it somewhere else. So you'd go back to the wall. You'd keep looking. And this is where the experience really opened up, because once you let go of the new releases, once you accepted that you weren't going to get whatever everyone else was trying to get that night, you'd drift back into the store. Into the older sections. Organized by genre. Comedy. Drama. Action. Horror. Thriller. Sci-fi. Kids. And these aisles, they were their own world. The lighting in those back aisles was a little different. A little quieter somehow, even though it was the same fluorescent light. You were away from the noise of the front of the store, away from the other people crowding the new release wall. Back here it was more intimate. You could browse. You could actually think. You might pull something off the shelf that you'd been meaning to watch for years. You might find something you'd never heard of with a cover that just caught your eye. Cover art mattered enormously in that world. Because you couldn't look anything up. There was no phone in your pocket with a review database and a trailer available in 30 seconds. You had the box. You had the picture on the front, the text on the back, and maybe, if you were lucky, a sticker that said staff pick with a handwritten note from whoever was working that week. Those staff pics were real. The people who worked at Blockbuster, especially the lifers, the ones who'd been there for years, they actually knew movies. They'd watched everything in the store. You could ask them and they'd give you a real answer. If you were renting with someone else, a spouse, a date, a parent, a friend, this part of the evening could take a while. Because tastes didn't always align. One person wanted the thriller. The other person wasn't in the mood for anything too intense, it had been a long week. Someone suggested the comedy they'd heard was good. Someone else had already seen it. The negotiation that happened in those aisles was a real domestic ritual, sometimes amusing, sometimes genuinely tense, always very human. You'd eventually land on something. Or two somethings. Sometimes three, because you were there anyway, and the incremental cost of a third tape felt small in the moment. Then you'd walk up to the counter. The counter at Blockbuster was its own little transaction with its own rhythm. You'd set your tapes down. The clerk would scan them. There was usually a moment where they'd check your account, because you had an account, you had a membership, you'd signed up for it at some point, given them your address and phone number, and now you existed in their system. And sometimes that system had something to say. Sometimes it had something very specific to say. Looks like you have a late fee on your account. Those words. If you were of a certain age and you spent any time at Blockbuster, you heard those words. And the specific mixture of feelings they produced, mild embarrassment, low-grade indignation, the mental calculation of whether to just pay it or try to explain yourself, that was a very particular texture of late 20th century American life. The late fee. The great villain of the Blockbuster story and, as it turned out, one of the great strategic liabilities in American business history. You had 3 days on a new release. Maybe 5 days on an older title. You'd forget. Life would happen. The tape would sit on top of the TV for a day longer than it should have. And then it was $2. Or $4. Or, if you really lost track of it, the full replacement cost, which they'd charge you for and then refund minus a restocking fee if you brought it back within a certain window. People hated this with a passion that was disproportionate to the actual dollar amounts involved. And that disproportionate hatred was the signal that Blockbuster should have read more carefully. Because it wasn't really about the money. It was about feeling punished. It was about a company that had you as a captive customer, because where else were you going to go? There was a Blockbuster in every neighborhood and the alternatives were thin, using that position to extract a little more from you every time they could. It left a residue. A low-level resentment that millions of Americans carried around for years without really thinking about it. Until the day a better option appeared, and that resentment became a reason to leave and never come back. But we're getting ahead of the story. Let's go back to the beginning. It's 1985. Dallas, Texas. A man named David Cook has just sold a software company he built and is trying to figure out what comes next. His wife works in the video rental business and she keeps coming home with the same complaints. The industry is a mess. Hundreds of small independent stores, no standardization, no systems, poor inventory management. You'd walk into a mom-and-pop video store and half the titles were misfiled, the selection was random, the staff knew nothing, and the whole operation felt like someone's hobby that had gotten slightly out of hand. Cook looked at that chaos and saw an opportunity. He had a background in software and data systems. He believed you could build something totally different, something organized, clean, large-scale, with real inventory systems and a real customer experience. He opened the first Blockbuster Video on October 19, 1985, on Stillman Avenue in Dallas. It was immediately unlike anything that existed in the industry at that time. The store was roughly 8,000 square feet, which was enormous. Most video rental stores were a few hundred square feet crammed into a strip mall. This was a destination. It stocked over 8,000 titles. The aisles were wide and clearly labeled. The lighting was bright and welcoming. Cook made a deliberate decision to keep the store family-friendly, no adult section, no material that would make parents uncomfortable bringing their children. He wanted the whole family to be able to walk in together on a Friday night and feel good about being there. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Lines formed out the door on opening weekend and they didn't stop. People drove from all over Dallas to see this store. Within the first few months, it was clear that Cook had identified something real, a massive underserved market of American families who wanted a good, reliable, pleasant experience renting movies, and who had never really been given one. Cook franchised it. The model spread. By 1987, there were 19 locations and the number was accelerating. And that's when Wayne Huizinga showed up. If you are not familiar with that name, here is the short version. Wayne Huizinga was one of the most relentless and successful dealmakers in American business history. He had already built waste management from a small garbage collection company into a national colossus. He had an extraordinary instinct for seeing a fragmented industry and understanding how to consolidate it, scale it, and make it worth many times what it had been worth before. He was not a technology visionary. He was not a product innovator. He was a growth machine. He bought into Blockbuster in 1987 and immediately began doing what he did better than almost anyone alive. He started opening stores everywhere. Not dozens. Hundreds. Thousands. Blockbuster under Huizinga stopped being a successful video chain and started becoming a national institution. They were acquiring regional competitors outright. They were pushing into Canada, into the United Kingdom, into Europe, into Latin America, into Australia. By the early 1990s, a new Blockbuster location was opening somewhere on Earth every 17 hours. Every 17 hours. At the peak of the expansion, Blockbuster had more than 9,000 stores worldwide. 60,000 employees. Annual revenue approaching $6 billion. On any given Friday night in the mid-1990s, one out of roughly every 3 videos rented anywhere in the United States was rented from a Blockbuster location. The company had become so ubiquitous that it was simply part of the landscape of American life. Like a gas station or a grocery store, you assumed there was one nearby because there almost always was. And it wasn't just a business. That's the thing that gets lost when people talk about Blockbuster purely in terms of its rise and fall as a corporate entity. It was a cultural institution. It was woven into the rhythms of how tens of millions of American families spent their time together. Friday night was Blockbuster night. Not metaphorically. Literally. Families had routines built around it. Parents and kids negotiating in the aisles. Couples making it part of their date night. Teenagers pooling money to rent a horror movie they weren't quite old enough to rent. Grandparents asking a clerk to help them find something they'd heard about on the news. People got their first jobs there. People met their future spouses in those aisles. People have specific, vivid memories tied to specific Blockbuster locations the way you have memories tied to a school or a neighborhood. Not because the place was extraordinary, but because you spent enough time there that it became part of your life. That kind of cultural embedding is enormously valuable. It's the kind of thing that most businesses spend decades trying to achieve and never quite get. Blockbuster had it. And it had it at a time when the entertainment landscape was about to be completely transformed. Which is exactly where things start to get complicated. The late 1990s were a period of accelerating change in how people consumed entertainment. DVDs were arriving and people loved them, the picture quality was better, the discs were smaller, they didn't need to be rewound, they had bonus features and chapter selection. VHS was starting to feel old almost overnight. Meanwhile, the internet was becoming real for ordinary households. Broadband was beginning to spread. And in Hollywood, the economics of the industry were shifting in ways that would have significant downstream effects on anyone in the rental business. There was also a quiet but important demographic and behavioral shift happening. The generation that had grown up with Blockbuster was getting older, getting busier, having kids, feeling more pressed for time. The idea of getting in the car and driving to a store and hoping the movie you wanted was available. That friction, which had been totally normal and accepted when there was no alternative, was starting to feel like an inconvenience. In 1997, a man named Reed Hastings co-founded a company called Netflix. The initial model was simple. You went to a website, you chose movies from a list, and they mailed you the DVDs. You watched them at home and mailed them back in a prepaid envelope. There were no late fees. You kept them as long as you wanted. When you returned one, they sent the next one on your list. It was not an instant revolution. In the early years, Netflix was a niche service used mostly by people who were either technology early adopters or serious film enthusiasts. The selection was good, but the mainstream audience wasn't paying much attention. By 1999 and into 2000, Netflix was struggling. The dot-com crash had made investors nervous about anything internet-related. The company was burning cash. The subscriber base was in the hundreds of thousands, not nothing, but not yet a real threat to a company with 9,000 stores and 60,000 employees. And so in the year 2000, Reed Hastings flew to Dallas. He walked into Blockbuster headquarters and sat down with their executives and made an offer. He wanted to sell Netflix to Blockbuster for $50 million. His pitch was that Netflix could become Blockbuster's online arm. A way for the giant retail chain to have a presence in the digital space without having to build it from scratch. Blockbuster said no. By the accounts of people who were present at that meeting, it was not a close call. The Blockbuster executives found the pitch somewhere between unimpressive and amusing. $50 million for a money-losing DVD mail service with a few 100,000 subscribers felt like an absurd ask. Blockbuster was generating billions of dollars in revenue. They had the brand. They had the locations. They had the relationships. They had the whole country walking through their doors every Friday night. Why would they pay $50 million for a company that was losing money to do a worse version of what Blockbuster was already doing? That logic, in the year 2000, was not entirely unreasonable. The failure wasn't stupidity. It was a failure of imagination combined with the natural human tendency to protect what you've built. The people running Blockbuster had spent 15 years building something extraordinary. Everything about the way they thought, the way they were compensated, the way their success was measured, it all pointed toward protecting and expanding the physical retail model. The idea that some website that mailed you discs and envelopes would eventually replace that entire ecosystem felt genuinely far-fetched.